Hello and welcome to another episode of Betting People. Today I'm very pleased to be joined by Terry Norman, who has an extensive background in not only racing media but also by working with some of those famous jockeys in recent flat history, including Oisin Murphy, Jason Weaver, Kevin Darley and Kieren Fallon. Thanks so much for joining us, Terry.
Good morning, Will. You okay?
I'm very good, actually, and I'm very pleased to have you here. So just want to go to the beginning of your time in racing, because it wasn't originally the plan for it to be your career. Apparently you had aspirations to be a footballer at one point.
Blimey, we're going back a few years now. Actually, I came very close to getting a professional contract. 16, I played for a Sunday side called Ripaway Newham, which was in East London, probably the best Sunday side there. And my claim to fame, if that's what you want to call it, is that I used to play left back, and the guy that played right back was Paul Parker. Now, Paul Parker, at the age of 16, was so good. We were very similar in stature. Both of us were quite small, both quite quick, except Paul Parker was a lot better. 18, Paul Parker went to Fulham, eventually ended up at Man United, and I think he played 19, 20 times for England. I went a less conventional route. I went to York City. And at 18, I had 2 reserve games. I was on the cusp of getting a professional contract. And then I bumped quite literally into a very big guy called Sam Allardyce. Now, Sam Allardyce was coming to the end of his career, and we had a game at Bolton, reserve game at Bootham Crescent. It was my 3rd game, I think, or 4th game for York City. And Sam, who would have been 34, 35, so he was coming to the end. I was 18. He came up for a corner and he hit me so hard, if the net hadn't have been there, I probably would have ended up in Doncaster. He broke 3 of my ribs.
Oh.
I literally didn't play for 2 months. I couldn't breathe for about 3 weeks. Didn't get the contract at York City. And bearing in mind, when you're 18 and you kind of think you're going to get one, it was devastating. 6 weeks later, I think it was probably a little bit longer than that, I got a call from Southend. And at the time, the Southend manager was Bobby Moore. So I went down to Southend for a trial there. Bearing in mind, I'm coming up to 19 now. So in them days, if you didn't really get a contract by that time, you were kind of non-league football. Got to Roots Hall, played really well. Second half, I broke my leg in 3 places. Tibia, fibia. I was out for 6 months, and then kind of decided that maybe the gods were telling me that I weren't going to be good enough. But I nearly got there, nearly did. But then that's when I kind of decided, I was doing journalism anyway when I was at school, kind of put it on hold because I wanted to play football, and then kind of went through a back door and gradually progressed up to what I eventually started to do. It was a long way, but I was devastated. At 18, I genuinely thought I'd be a professional football player. I mean, I played again. When I went to the Life, we played in the team there, and I played at a decent level, but never up. Once you kind of lose your speed, which is what I did, which was my main forte, because I wasn't the strongest and I wasn't the biggest, I kind of realised then that, as I tend to do with a lot of things I've done in my career, if I'm not going to be good at what I'm going to do or not be the best, then I'd rather try and do something else, which is what then I went on to do.
And you got a break into racing, which is where you moved to, through the Wembley Greyhounds. Tell us more about that.
Well, eventually, when I first went, after I gave up football professionally, I got a job. There used to be a bookmaker called William Massey, which used to be in Bow Road, funny enough. I went there, 18 and a half, I think 19, learned how to settle properly, could have gone into bet shop management. Didn't quite fancy the idea of that. So I eventually answered an ad at Romford, actually, before I went to Wembley, just to work in the office. I love greyhound racing ever since I was a kid. I used to go Hackney with my mum and my dad. So I got a job in the racing office to Romford initially. For 3 years I worked there, built my way up to assistant racing manager, learned how to grade the cards, which will come on to the love of American horse racing and Southwell later on, because primarily with greyhound racing, it's all about times, sectional times, run styles. From there, I went to Wembley. I was Wembley for 4 years. Anybody that actually follows greyhound racing will know of the great Ballyregan Bob, where they had a showdown one night at Wembley between Ballyregan Bob, Glen Owen Queen, Trackman, and an enigma called Skirlow Champ. It was on Sports Night, one of the biggest screen events in greyhound racing history, and everyone will remember the night that Skirlow Champ actually stopped on the winning line. What a lot of people probably won't realise was I was the one that actually carried him off the track. The downside is, in them days, not so much now, I used to have a Kevin Keegan perm. So there was a great picture in the next day's paper of the Daily Mirror, and it says, Hazel Dixon carries off Skirlow Champ. They thought I was the actual daughter of one of the trainers at Wembley because I had permed hair. Yeah, it's amazing. I love Wembley. I loved there, but to be fair, I always wanted to move back into journalism. So I think 88, 87, 88, I got offered the chance to go and work on the greyhound desk at the Sporting Life. It was at New Fetter Lane in them days. And I stayed at Wembley, Sporting Life for 10 years. The difference was, even though I enjoyed greyhound racing, I always wanted to move into horses. Now, when I was a kid, and I'm talking 14, 15, I used to go down to Henry Candy's during the school holidays, just literally for 6 weeks, because I just loved being around horses. They were the times when Henry had Pipe Dreamer, Master Willie, Britannia's Rule. From there, the following year, I went to Newmarket and actually got taught how to ride by Patrick Haslam. He was at Pegasus Stables then. Brian Jago was his jockey, and that was the year that Troy won the Derby. So that would have been 77, 76, 77. And funny enough, God bless Patrick, who's no longer with us. When I started moving into journalism and doing horse racing, when I first met Patrick again, I said, "Oh, do you remember that you taught me how to ride?" And he says, "I don't remember the face, but my God, I do remember your voice." and then I dealt with Patrick via later on with the jockeys, and I'm sure people with long memories will realise he had Pipe Major, who ended up finishing third to Pennycamp and Celtic Swing in the Guineas, and then he went and won with a filly who I can't remember the name on the top of my head, that Kevin Darley then rode for him later on when she won a Group 1 race when News All Stud owned her. So it's funny how a lot of my career has been interwoven along the way with people that I would then meet again further down the line that would come back into what I was actually doing. So I enjoyed Wembley. I enjoyed greyhound racing, even to this day, even though I don't really participate in it as much. I still enjoy it as a spectacle rather than as a business. But racing was where I always wanted to be. And I got a break early on in greyhound journalism, but I always wanted to move into racing. Never did on the life, strangely enough. What I used to do, because I'm not a natural journalist, I mean, I can write, but I suppose if you were equating it in terms of a football analogy, I would be the Didier Deschamps compared with someone who would be like a Paul Gascoigne. So what I used to do when I wanted to do more racing journalism, I used to do essays and features, and then I used to go and give them to Alastair Down. Alastair was deputy editor at the time. So he would then go to me, "Well, your grammar's not great here, or you made a mistake here and you didn't structure it properly." So for 3 years, I used to do, like, Weekender used to do stable tours. So I used to go and do one of those, go and present it to Alastair, see where I went wrong, rearrange it. I did one of Claire Balding's first interviews in the Weekender as well, when she just joined the BBC. So that would have been 93, 92. So I did one with her. And from that, weirdly enough, it's like when you get off one bus and then you get onto another one as an extension. Gay Kellaway rang me out the blue one day and she says, "Oh, would you be interested in being a jockey's agent?" No, I never really gave it much thought. And again, I thought it was a way in. So my very first jockey I did was Wendell Woods. He'd come back from Hong Kong, where he was really successful. He came back to ride for his brother. They had a really beautiful looking grey horse called Mistlecat. He won a couple of group races. And from there, now you follow football, Jason Weaver at the time had been at Luca Kamani's for about a year and a half, and he looked very promising, like a lot of apprentices there. Jimmy Fortune had just won the Champion Apprentice title. Jason was the next one along Luca's production line. And the guy that was actually booking Jason's ride, would you believe, was David Craig. You know, the Sky Sports reporter? He was doing Jason's rides at the time. Luca's stable jockey was Ray Cochran. And just out of the blue, he turned around and said to me, would you be interested in doing my rides? And that kind of got me going. So suddenly then you've got a 3-course meal rather than a sort of pot noodle. And from there, first year Jason he finished second in the apprentice title to Ollie Pears. Ollie Pears was the champion apprentice at the time. And then the next year we went to town. I mean, Jason won the apprentice title. Towards the back end of the season, I mean, I'm not sure how old Jason was. He started getting rides for Mark Johnson, because what we used to do to win the apprentice title, a bit like now, you have to go everywhere. In them days, the season would go from January to December. So Jason would start going up to Musselburgh and riding for Eric Alston. So while we were going up to Eric Alston, one day, out of the blue, Mark Johnson appears in a lot of my history, by the way. Jason got a couple of rides for him at Musselburgh one day. I can't remember who was riding. Bobby Elliott used to be stable jockey, but someone couldn't ride one day. It might have been Joe Fanning, because Joe would have been riding then. Jason got on him, won a couple of races with him, won the apprentice title. And from there, sorry, just had a bit of water. From there, Mark started to use him in better class races. Now, towards the end of that 2-year-old season, Mr. Bailey's, who was ridden by Dale McEwen at the time, won the Royal Lodge. So over the winter, Paul Venner, who owned Mr. Bailey's, wanted a top flight jockey to ride him in the Guineas. Now, at the time, Frankie was favourite to ride it. So over the winter, we kept pressing Mark's hand, look, really want to ride Mr. Bailey's. Mr. Bailey's then came back and had a racecourse gallop at Ripon, which Jason rode him. And he was unbelievable. And Jason said to me, we've got to try and get on this. We've got to try and get on this. Still second in line to Frankie. And then suddenly, 2 weeks before the Guineas, Frankie decided that he wanted to ride Grand Lodge. Now, those with good memories will know on the actual day, Mr. Bailey's beat Grand Lodge a short head. So Jason got his first classic. Mark got his first classic. And from there on in, stable jockey became Jason's norm. He rode all Mark Johnson's horses for that. I think it was the next 2 seasons. He got on Double Trigger, who went on to be the greatest stayer of all time. Double Eclipse, his half brother. And then probably Jason's finest ever ride was when he won the St. James's Palace on Bijou Dan. Unbelievable. And then we had the brain freeze, because Mr. Bailey's went from the Guineas to the Derby. Now, I mean, you're a lot younger than me, but the talk of the Derby of that year was Jason deciding at the 3 furlong pole that let's go for glory. Even to this day and age, Mr. Bailey's has still done the quickest sectional time between the 3 furlong and the furlong pole. I think it was going back when you go back and watch the races, it's like something like 23-2. He just took off, didn't stay, and then Herhab come up his inside and done him for stamina in the end of the day. But that was probably one of Jason's worst rides. But some of the rides from the front he did was amazing. And then unfortunately, with a lot of flat jockeys, Jason's weight started to become an issue. And in the end, I think he got another 2 seasons and then he retired. But the weird part about Jason was because he struggled with his weight, he used to rent a house just outside Newmarket, one of the studs, I think it was Stepsworth. It was a long time ago. So we're talking about 94, 95. So ultimately, we used to have meetings. But the problem is Jason always wanted to have a meeting while he was having a bath. because he was sweating so much. The downside is Jason never used bubble bath. So I used to sit in his bathroom while he was sitting in the bath. And it's a bit like trying to find when there's an elephant in the room. You're trying to look everywhere where you shouldn't be looking. And all I can say to this day is, Jason has got 2 kids. I can now understand totally why they're a lot taller than him. Totally. Just by seeing him in the bath.
Well, that is quite a note from which to end part 1 of Betting People with Terry Norman. Thanks for that fantastic anecdote, Terry. More to come in part 2.